Welcome everyone to the panel, The New Wave of Latin America Horror Cinema Part 2, the sequel, here at Comic Con at Home 2020. And just by saying 2020, it's already scary. It's quite a scary year we're living in. There are wildfires, killer bees, UFOs, volcanoes, a virus. I don't know if you've heard about it. There was also a werewolf in Chiapas, Mexico. What a crazy year to be alive, but also a very important one. So thank you very much for being here. Today, we're going to have filmmakers from various Latin America countries who are the main exponents in the horror genre in Latin America. So these guys, their job is to scare Latinos. Do you know how hard that is? Latinos face horrors every day. Your mom's chancla, contaminated the tap water, and the fact that you never know if your street taco is actually beef or a street dog. And, corruption, politicians. But today it's not about that. Today is about the movies that make our skin crawl, like when you hear your mother call out your full name in public. Jose Francisco Sebastian Jerónimo Muñoz Fink, ven acá. That is scary. I would like you to welcome our very special and talented set of panelists. First of all, ripping all the way from Cuba with an entire army of vampire, demons, and zombies, Alejandro Brugués.
Woo!
Woo! This man crossed the way from hell and found out things that will terrify the entire world, and he might share some of us with us today. From Aedo, Argentina, Demián Rugna.
Yeah.
Fearless as a tiger, unleashing her inner werewolf. Pray to Our Lady of Tears for salvation because Issa López is here.
Woohoo!
Joining this brand new trilogy of terror, you asked for it, and like in any good horror sequel, sometimes they come back. Possessed by an ancient Aztec demon, thirsty for blood, gore, and culture shocks, La Muñeca del Terror, Gigi Saul Guerrero.
Yeah. Gracias.
He traveled through dark dimensions and parallel universes to be with us one more time. A similar face to the last year. He is Isaac Ezban.
Woohoo!
And last but not least, bringing out the cosmic horror and some tortas agadas to this panel, the thrilling tapatio power of Victor Osuna. So, guys, before we begin with this panel, I would like to ask you, each one of you, to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your projects, your work. Let's begin with Alejandro.
How weird is that intro without a real audience? So I'm Alejandro Brugués. I'm from Cuba. I directed a film called Juan of the Dead about zombies, not vampires or demons. And now I live in LA. Here I have done a bunch of different things. I have done TV. I did episodes of the series From Dusk Till Dawn. I have been in a couple of anthologies in ABC's of Dead 2 and in Nightmare Cinema, where I did a really fun story. And I just recently finished already in quarantine a couple of things that came out while we were in our lockdown, which is one movie for the Blumhouse anthology show Into the Dark. I did Puka Leaves, and I also did an episode of Sam Raimi, I guess TV show for Quibi show called 50 States of Fright. That's it.
All right, Demián.
Well, my name is Demián Rugna. I'm from Argentina. As you know, you can see my English is no good. But, well, my career started in 2005 when I made my first movie called The Last Gateway. After this one, I made another one called Cursed Bastard. Obviously, previously Terrifier, I made a black comedy with a monster called You Don't Know Who who you are talking about, something like that. It's a big name, extra large name. Terrified was my fourth movie. You can see in Netflix. It's around the world in this moment. In this pandemic, I wrote a miniseries and a horror movie called When the Evil Lurks. And obviously the second part of Terrified, and still working in the remake of this movie here from my house, but waiting to everything go, the virus go out, and I could do my movie there. So this is me.
That's a pretty good English. Come on. Now, Miss Issa López.
Hi, I'm Issa. I'm Mexican. I live for the moment in Los Angeles. I've lived in a bunch of places. Before that, we'll see what happens next. And I come from comedy. And I wrote and directed 3 comedies in Mexico. I also wrote a bunch of romantic comedies. And if I were you, I would never watch them because some other people directed them, and I will not be responsible of your mental health if you go there. However, very proudly, I finally came out of the closet with Vuelven or Tigers Are Not Afraid, and which is, I think, my true voice and who I really am. And people responded beautifully to that movie, and I'm back in the US prepping some pretty fun projects. I have a werewolf Western that I'm cooking with mi maestro, Guillermo del Toro. I'm prepping a movie with Noah Hawley, who is a showrunner of Fargo and an incredible writer and director, now producer. And it's a movie about the end of the world called The Book of Souls. And finally, I'm in the middle of writing a script for Blumhouse based on a true story that happened in the outskirts of Mexico City, where more than 600 girls fell under a spell of mass hysteria or something else. We'll figure out. That's called Our Lady of Tears, and that's what I'm trying to get off the ground right now.
Great. So, Miss Gigi.
Man, I'm inspired by Isa. That's a true chingona right there. Yeah, hi guys. ¿Cómo estamos? I'm Gigi Saul Guerrero. I'm from Mexico City. I live in Vancouver, Canada now, so I guess you could say I'm like Mexinadian. But a lot of people know me for my work with Lucha Gore Productions, which is my production company here in Vancouver. I've made over 16 short films. A lot of them have gone viral. And just all that hard work in short films and viral shorts is what got our name out there, what got definitely my name out there. That's how I met a good friend of mine named Eli Roth, who introduced me to his channel at the time called Crypt TV. So I was one of the first filmmakers to produce films for them. I've also had my feature debut, Culture Shock, for Blumhouse last year. That's now on Hulu. And it's really been a great journey, and I'm super excited to continue to learn. I have a first look deal with Blumhouse, so we're just planning a lot of cool stuff. Hopefully after the pandemic, we will have a lot of cool projects to get back on track. And as you can see, I'm in my voice booth. This was my quarantine project, so I can continue voice acting as well as directing, because acting is one of my most favorite things. So, yeah.
Mr. Isaac?
Well, I'm very happy to be back on this panel. And one of the great things of now doing it online is that now people can watch it everywhere, and we can be many directors from different countries together. So there are some, I would say, very, very few good things of the pandemic, and that's one of them, that we can be all here, people from Vancouver, from LA, from Mexico. And well, my name is Ezban. I am a writer and director. I've made 3 feature films. My first film was The Incident, released in 2014. Then my second film, The Similars, released in 2015. Both of them are sci-fi films, psychological sci-fi, very much in the vein of The Twilight Zone. And then I did my third film, which is my first English spoken film, called Parallel, with Bronze Studios. And that's a movie about parallel universes that is coming out this year. Hopefully you can all see it in this universe and other universes too. And during this lockdown, like all of you guys, I'm trying to make things happen, keeping with the writing of other projects. I've done mostly science fiction. I was also part of 2 anthologies, Mexico Barbaro and December, which is coming out this year too. But I'm now exploring doing more something in horror, and actually my 2 new films, one that might be shot this year, and one that might be shot next year, are horror. So I'm excited to taste a little of the horror blood in my vein for my coming projects. But I will always be a sci-fi guy too. So that's me.
I've loved your horror since Mexico Bárbaro, Isaac. It's time to come back
Yes,
to
thank
the
you,
gore.
Gigi. Thank you.
Yeah.
Victor?
Hi, my name is Victor Osuna. I'm from Guadalajara. I'm the little one here, the rookie player of this dream team. I premiered my first movie, my very first an independent movie, 1 year ago in Comic-Con. It's called Las Reglas de la Ruina, The Rules of Ruin, and it's a Lovecraftian tale set in Guadalajara that involves a grimoire, a dark book, and a lot of psychological horror. And I'm working right now on my second movie that might get a little bit further in the way, because all these things that are happening in the world kind of push everything. But I'm positive, and I'm taking time to write what could be my third one. So let's do it.
Let's do it, Victor. So let's begin with the questions. Okay, you are representing the new wave of horror filmmakers in Latin America, and you are inspiring young filmmakers who dream with making horror or science fiction movies. You're inspiring a new generation to make movies. So I must ask you, which Latin American filmmakers inspired you? As well, which movies inspired you or you consider are highly relevant in the history of the genre in Latin America? Alejandro?
Okay. I don't recall. I suck at this. I think when I started making movies, making horror, I guess the only Latin American filmmaker that was big in horror and still the biggest was Guillermo del Toro. So I guess he was my biggest influence from Latin America. You also have to keep in mind that I was growing up in Cuba in the 80s, so it's not like we got a bunch of stuff from different places, and certainly not horror. So I had to find my way in all of that. But really, other than Guillermo, I can't think of any Latin American filmmaker that was truly an influence on me doing horror. There is one movie though, that's a Cuban movie, and it's not exactly horror, that it's called Vampires in Havana, Vampiros en La Habana, that it's one of the big landmarks from my childhood, because it's a cartoon about vampires in Havana, and it's vampires, and it's also comedy, and it's one of the funniest things that I watched growing up, and I would watch that over and over. And when I started with Juan of the Dead, that was, of course, one of my biggest influences, because it was the only other reference that we had in Cuba about genre being done there. So I guess those are my 2 cents, literally.
Okay, Demian?
Well, we have a local hero here in Argentina, and he is Narciso Ibáñez Menta. But I'll be honest with you, it's like Alejandro. We have not a really past of a horror hero in Latin America. I suppose my unique hero in Latin America is Guillermo del Toro. So it's difficult for me to find another director or movie in the 80s or early 90s who inspired me from Latin America, because I grew up watching the 80s Hollywood movie, Spielberg, and maybe some horror movie, John Carpenter, or our actual hero. But I'll be honest with you, we have our past like Argentinian, and I must say Narciso Ibáñez Menta, who is the father of Chicho Serrador in Spain. But after him, there's no horror or fantastic movie since 24 years in Argentina. I mean, between 82 till 2008, something like that, without a horror movie. Yes, independent movie, yeah, of course, but not in the theaters. Argentinian movie, I'd say. So it's hard for me to say, okay, this is my another hero beside Guillermo. No, I suppose that everyone here has the Guillermo like the top guy in Latin America. So even I.
Okay, Issa?
Well, my case is different because even though, like everyone else, I was heavily influenced by the Amblin cinema and John Carpenter and Nightmare on Elm Street and The Shining and all those movies that all of us saw. The truth of the matter is, if you were a Mexican kid in Mexico and you visited your granny's home, the TV would be always set to broadcast this Mexican cinema of especially the 50s and 60s. And it was honestly B movies. But they were populated by this deluge of fantasy. And it was Películas del Santo, Luchador movies, that now are incredibly funny. But when I was a kid, they were the real thing for me. And they had Las Momias de Guanajuato, the Guanajuato Mummies. And we had our own Latin American werewolf. And, if I tried to watch that stuff today, I would laugh my ass off. Probably I shouldn't do it sober, by the way. But it was there, and it was nourishing my growing up. In Mexico, we have the influence of quite heavyweight, unique voice in general that was Carlos Taboada. And he made, and I've talked about his work several times, he made Poison for the Fairies. And his titles are incredible. He made Even the Wind Has Fear or Blacker Than the Night. And the another one was The Stone Book. And the concepts underneath the movies are frightening and are still alive. And all of that, while you were talking to your Grammy, who was telling you the stories from her little town in northern Mexico and how the devil would come visit sometimes, and you could escape the devil if you wore your clothes inside out. And all of that was mixed in my daily meals. So yes, it made me who I am, and it gave me the voice I have today.
Okay, Gigi?
A similar story. I come from a really Catholic, really religious household. And I mean, I think for my abuela and my mom, everything is the devil. Everything's the devil, everything's a superstition. So my influence of always being scared of something was actually where my curiosity was growing. And I mean, I come from also a family with a grandma that's very creative in the sense of she knows how to scare us. She knows how to put us to bed. And she'd always tell me like stories with Aluches, La Llorona, El Coco, everything just to shut me up because I was a terrible child. I'm the reason why my parents stopped having kids, if anybody was curious. But, so growing up, I was really curious. Why can't I see all these horror movies? Why can't I see anything scary? It wasn't until I had to rebel against them to watch horror movies on my own, but I didn't know this would make me a filmmaker. I grew up in the 90s, so for me was definitely, I was influenced by big blockbuster movies at my age. I'm talking obsessed with Jurassic Park, Independence Day. Like those are the kind of movies I grew up with. Those are the kind of movies that I was, in love with at the time growing up. And it wasn't until, and I'll never forget this day, it wasn't until I was about 16 or 17 years old and I saw Alfonso Cuarón's Children of Men. And I had never seen such a mature movie for my age. I was in love with freaking like Little Nicky and silly films like that, blockbuster movies, horror movies. Nothing was impactful for me yet. I would say my taste was somewhat not immature, but definitely I had room to grow at that age. And when I saw Children of Men, everything changed for me. It was actually the night that my sister went on a date with a guy at the time. He was in film school. And he saw how in shock I was with a movie like that just spoke to me, not through its violence, but through its visceral storytelling and how humanity sucks, to be completely honest. And no movie ever in the history of Gigi at that time had ever felt so in my heart, and no movie had ever hit me so hard in the face. And he told me, I'm going to film school. That's what I'm learning to do. And I said, wow, there's such a thing called film school. And he said, yeah, we're learning how to be directors like this guy. Oh, by the way, he's Mexican. You should look into the other two amigos. And I was like, who's that? So I looked into it. Del Toro, like we've all talked about, popped up. Iñárritu popped up. And I was like, oh my God, where are all these amazing filmmakers coming from? I started to watch Amores Perros and just other movies of these guys that I was like, this is incredible. So and that led me to find out more my voice. It just kind of led me towards Tarantino and Rodriguez. And if you see my body of work, you will notice it's heavily influenced of just pure blood, gore, unapologetic shorts. And same with my feature film, and even the TV shows I've directed have come from that experience. But I strongly feel that you have to be impacted by something. In this case was that movie. It'll lead you to do your research and you will find your voice in a matter of time.
Isaac?
Well, it seems like the question has been shifting a little bit from stories we grew up watching and loving to Latin American filmmakers we admire who do genre films. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both. First of all, I wish I could say that, like Issa, I grew up watching a lot of Mexican classic horror films or B-movies on TV, but unfortunately, I didn't see those movies when I was growing up. I actually grew up watching more Wes Craven. I remember, I think Scream was the very first horror movie I saw. There was this VHS of Scream that I was even afraid of touching it. And I remember watching it for the first time and feeling those goosebumps that you feel when you're afraid of something. And then I watched more of Wes Craven, and I saw all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, and I watched more of slashers from the 80s and 70s, and a lot of Cronenberg too. And that's a little bit of how I started to early Cronenberg, of course. That's a little bit how I started to understand the basis of horror for me. And I, of course, knew about Del Toro, who we have been, everyone has been talking about it, and he's definitely the one titan we all hugely admire and are influenced by. I did see Del Toro's movies as they were coming up as I was growing up, but it wasn't until probably when I was already studying film when I actually really dug into Del Toro's style and I really saw what he was doing. And even older, even after already I have made my first feature film, I admired him even more after I started to analyze how I think the reason why Del Toro's films are so great is because he really grabs, he really has a special way of talking about realistic stages of life, like coming of age, or about realistic situations, or about something really dark, like the contrast between boys and the innocence of boys and the world of adults through the lens of genre. And that's what I've been trying to do in my science fiction films, trying to talk about something real and something very human through the lens of genre, of a fantastical element or a horror element. So yeah, Del Toro, I would say, is pretty much the one I admire the most in Latin American horror filmmakers. I would say others like Andy Muschietti or like Fede Alvarez are other great Latin American directors that have made some really great horror films. And even some people who are with us today, you know, I really admire Issa's movie Vuelven, and also Alejandro's movie, and also Gigi's work, and Damián, I love your film, and you know, some people that are not here today, but like the work of Emilio Portes or Rigoberto Castañeda or Jorge Michel Grau have also done really great genre. And to talk about Spanish directors too, I mean, they are not Latin Americans, but directors like Amenábar, like Oriol Paulo, like Jaume Balaguero, like Paco Plaza, those are directors that really, I mean, to talk about more directors doing genre that are not specifically American, those are also directors that I'm really heavily influenced by their style and I really admire their movies.
Very well. Victor?
Well, I think they all already ended up my references. They talk about every and each one of the people I admire, the directors I admire. Taboada, Del Toro. I also like the work of Moctezuma, the Alucardas movie. It's a great movie, and some like perks around the Mexican movie, not hate horror, but maybe El Escapulario, El Vampiro, I don't know, La Llorona, of course, The Skeleton of La Señora Morales, one of my favorites too. So you can find a lot of different roots, because I think one of the important things about Latino filmmaking is somehow they have horror in their veins. Even if you're talking about a car crash that involves three people, three different stories, or the fact that humanity is almost over and there's only one pregnant woman, for example, and you can go and talk about Issa's work, Isaac's work, Gigi's work, Emilio, Demián, and Alex Brooks. Everybody, I think there's no stopping at learning and admiring different work, because the voices are all around the world, but Latinos have a special flavor.
Great, thank you very much. By the way, if my English is better, it's because I'm way less nervous. So, continuing, filmmaking is, in a certain way, a multidisciplinary art, and it is a fact that not only movies inspire filmmakers, but other forms of art as well, such as novels, paintings, poems, tales, myths, comic books, etc. So I would like to ask you about your other sources of inspiration for your work. Alejandro?
It sucks to be the first, because then everyone comes afterward and starts expanding on all the questions, and like I have to sit here listening to everyone.
I'll go first.
I'll go first. Okay, go first. You go first. I'll take Issa's spot.
Okay, so for me, comic books, first of all, are a passion, and I think even the very nerve, the very center of my work is perhaps best captured in the work of Neil Gaiman, who did the most amazing. I can't believe the title escaped me. Jesus Christ, the adventures of the Lord of Dreams. Help me, anybody here?
Sandman.
Sandman. Thank you, Alejandro. So he did Sandman, and Sandman number 50. There's an encounter between the Raja of Baghdad, who wants his kingdom to live forever, and the Lord of Dreams, and they strike a deal where the Baghdad of stories is going to live forever in the stories, and the Baghdad left behind for the real world is the Baghdad ravaged after the war of the Gulf in the 90s. And the difference between that real Baghdad and that dream Baghdad, for me, when I read that, it just struck such a deep chord. And I realized that that's my entire thing. It's about the clash between what we have and what we dream, what we actually are faced with in reality, and what we believe is possible. And every single movie, even the comedies that I've directed, are about that clash between our dreams and our real life, between what's possible with faith and what we assume is the very limited reality we have. So comics have been very central to me. That said, right now, and I want to escape the what influenced the origin of my work and talk about what's influencing me right now. There is a movement of female Latin American writers. I'm talking about Fernanda Melchor in Mexico, Marta Enriquez, Mariana Enriquez in Argentina, Carmen Maria Machado in the US, that are taking the elements of real life and mixing them not with magical realism, which is a little old and tired right now. We really rode that pony. And they're tinting it with true visceral horror. And that clash between a reality that is already horrible and the elements of horror make for a universe very friendly to what Tigers is. And I think there's no end to where we can go through with that by taking what's happening right now in Latin America or in the Latin side of the US or Canada or the world, and finding the horror is already there and shining a light in it and taking it to what Neil Gaiman did with Sandman, to what if there is a dream world and a real world. And my work is in between those two. So those are my influences right now.
Okay, Demián.
Well, my father was like a warlock. It was strange relation from Brazil. I'm from Argentina, but he was so he made a lot of I don't know how to say it in English, but reunions with witchery. I grew up with chicken and another animals for sacrifice, and a lot of blood in my house, this house, around there. I suppose that inspired me. Obviously, the movies is in the first position who inspired me. I think writers like Julio Cortázar or Cliff Barker are my favorites, and I suppose I'm trying to make a mix between that styles. Even I think that also the comic books like Swamp Thing. I don't like the superhero, but I prefer the European comic. And also I think my own toys like G.I. Joe, because they had guns and they shoot their guns, and it made me to build stories around them, playing with them, trying to think. When I was a child, trying to make histories with them. So I suppose that is my young influence.
Great. So, Alejandro, are you ready now?
I am. Damian was saying something interesting there, because I also grew up playing with a lot of toys and making up so many stories. I didn't grow up in Cuba. I grew up in Bolivia. Because my parents were diplomats and were working there, and I also had my GI Joes and used to play a lot for hours and come up with stories. I guess literary influences. Well, you have to start with Stephen King. I used to read a lot when I was a kid, but then when I read Stephen King, let's say he was the reason why I decided to learn English, because I wanted to read him in the original. And I remember the first time I read I read the first chapter. And when I got to school, I grabbed one of my best friends, and I gave him the book, and I was like, read this chapter now in front of me, because it's awesome. But also a lot of Latin American writers like Jorge Luis Borges, Julio Cortázar, Horacio Quiroga. A lot of art growing up. I think all the time when you find an interesting image, I think I at least I do. I always save them somewhere, because they will come handy for inspiration at some point. I don't know, Goya and things like that. But I think what has always inspired me the most has been reality, and it's been like I said, growing up in a place like Bolivia, you hear all those stories because there's a lot of lore, and you hear a lot of urban legends and shit like that really freak you out, and they really know how to tell stories. And then even more interesting, in Cuba, you don't have any of that, because it's the opposite. It's, well, at least when I was growing up, communism. So you don't have any ghost stories and all that, but you have something that it's almost better. And it's that you also don't have red press, I guess. They don't talk about crimes on TV, but people talk about those crimes. So you're always hearing that someone killed someone and chopped him to pieces and that kind of stuff. But you hear a version that someone heard because their neighbor told him. And when the story gets to you, it's so rich and you don't know the truth. So you start filling in the blanks and coming up with something. And I guess to this day, that's something I always try to go back to. What's the truth in those stories? And I have found out that the more you base them on reality, the better they are.
Thank you. Gigi?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can all relate. We come from such a rich background with such an amazing folklore. And even just the way as Latinos, especially Mexicans, if I may say, the way we look at death is so different. We embrace it, we cherish it, we celebrate it. Dia de los Muertos is one of the most beautiful holidays that we have in this world. And for me, growing up in just that culture is incredible. One of the things, though, on my end, having to move to Canada, for me was always so important to stay so connected to where I was from, because here in Canada is people from all over the world. And I found that the more and more I was connected to what inspired me, which was our own history, our own culture, I was obsessed with the story of Joaquin Murrieta. I was obsessed with Frida Kahlo. I was obsessed with anything that was our history, los Aztecas, los Maya, you name it. We have such a beautiful, in Mexico, story to tell in all corners of Mexican culture. And that to me to narrow it down, that really is the inspiration that has given me in my work, because I've never wanted to lose, my race and where I come from. Now, just to kind of finish my statement with something funny, again, rebelling against my family, not wanting me to watch anything scary. When I was really, really young, though I loved Pokemon, Chavo del Ocho, and like all those shows at the time, I had this VHS player, this VCR player, whatever, and it would play very cool. Whatever tape you would put in, it would play stuff frame by frame, and it was my most favorite toy ever. Like that was my obsession as a kid, was this VHS player that could play stuff frame by frame. And since a kid, my first dream was to be an animator, was to draw, was to be anything to do with cartoons was my thing. And I would play all the classical Disney movies and put them in frame by frame until I would find a mistake. Ooh, child, I found a lot of mistakes in a lot of the movies, but for some reason that was my obsession. So when I got older, I would tape I would tape plastic surgeries on TV and play them frame by frame. That's how fucked up I was, because I was like, I want to know this shit that my family is keeping away from me. And I would legit watch after school. This was like my time. It was Chavo el Ocho, Dragon Ball Z, and then I would watch plastic surgeries frame by frame because I was not allowed to watch it. That, for some reason, that's what kept me going. I think that's why all my work is super gory, which is fine. But this was just because that was the only access I had. And I mean, my imagination would run wild because, I mean, I remember in Mexico City, you walk out of McDonald's and the newsstand right beside me, the front page, there's someone with their head missing. It like, is that serious? It's that visceral. And I would always just question, why can't I know more about this? And my family would just be very, they would just very much say no to all that stuff. And I just kind of had to find out on my own in the most weird ways. Anyways, someone else take it away before I talk more.
Okay, we have very few minutes left, but Isaac, it's your turn.
Isaac.
Isaac forgot to turn on his mic.
Sorry. I was mute. Sorry, because you have kids running out and everything. So I wanted to. Okay. So I know we have very little time, so I'm going to try to be quick on this. Everyone knows I'm obviously very hugely influenced by the Twilight Zone, and this is strange because I didn't even grow up when the Twilight Zone was originally airing, on TV. But I remember my father showed me an episode of the Twilight Zone, and I was completely blown away. And what I really liked was how all these stories, it always seemed like you were watching a real drama of something serious, something realistic, like somebody losing their jobs, or somebody whose son or daughter is sick, or somebody who's traveling on a highway and gets lost. And then suddenly there would be a very unexpected twist into the supernatural. And then, of course, as a teenager, I bought all the DVDs and I watched all the 150 episodes of the original season. And what I really liked was how Rod Serling and all the other creators and storytellers from the time really were able to tell in a room with two people the most mind-blowing stories about aliens, artificial intelligence, deal with the devil, time travel, ideas that are really, really complex, that were told in a really small, reduced scale. So I said, wow, I want to do something like this. And that's like the first thing that really shaped my style. And then I started reading more and more sci-fi from the 50s and 60s. Like, I'm a huge fan of Philip K. Dick, Richard Matheson. And then, of course, Stephen King, that Alejandro really talked a lot about Stephen King. I try to read at least one Stephen King book every year. And it always feels when you go to other writers, when you come back to King, you feel the punch, like you feel the narrative and the way he has with words and how he's pulling you into the story. And I love the adaptations too. And then on my films, for example, I would say The Incident wouldn't exist without Cloud Atlas, not the movie, but the novel by David Mitchell. I remember being really impressed by the novel, and that's why inspired me to write The Incident. And then I would say the similars would not exist without, of course, Twilight Zone. So that kind of literature has really, really influenced my films, and I always try to discover new voices in either sci-fi or horror literature, and TV series as well. Lost was one of my big influences too, and Lost had that real essence, like this essence between something that is very touching and very deep and profound, and at the same time very creepy and unexpected, and that was something I really liked and really inspired me as a storyteller as well. So those are some of my references.
Very well. To wrap it up, Victor,
Well, I would like to say that I am a very visual person. So mostly I try to look for visual references outside of movies. And I love the work of Caravaggio, the work of Beksinski, the work of Barlow, the work of H. Giger. Those are like my inspiration. And I also it's kind of weird, but I used to put a lot of soundtracks from movies or classical pieces or weird things like Smashing Pumpkins, Korn, Depeche Mode. Those kind of things put me in some kind of a vibe to write and to imagine things.
Great. So I hate to be the party pooper here, El Aguafiestas, but our time is up. So just to finish the panel, I would like you guys to briefly give any advice to any young filmmaker or any filmmaker who may be watching this panel, or any storyteller, any advice you could tell them to pursue their dream in making films.
Can I start
Anyone?
with something?
You want to start? Is that
Oh no,
Yeah.
the same order. Okay, yeah, okay.
Because Alejandro, I don't know if he wants to start.
Okay.
Oh, I know the advice.
I'll
I
go.
have it. It's like, okay, get comfortable shoes. That's it.
That was brief.
You're gonna be standing up a lot, so yeah.
Everybody has a phone. You can make a movie now. You can make something right now. Oh, sorry if I interrupted anybody. Perdón.
No. It's shoes and a phone. There you go.
Shoes and a phone. No, dude, I can tell anybody listening that's just starting out. I came from, film school. I have no family or anybody in film, and my career worked out for just doing viral videos of stuff that is trending with no money. I'm telling you, nada de dinero, no money, and just do stuff that is trending, do stuff that everybody can relate, because we have at our disposal social media. That is YouTube, Twitter, you call it. That is how you get exposure nowadays, and it works. Worked for me.
Is that your mic?
I'm going to be the old lady here and completely contradict Gigi. No, Gigi is completely right. That's absolutely a path, and it's a fantastic path, and it can be very fast. I personally feel that my path has been about listening to yourself and not rushing into things. So for me, it's the opposite, and I think you can pick either or. For me, movies are like a tattoo. They're going to stay with you. So just like a tattoo, wait for it. It'll come to you. You will know. Don't go into, I'm going to have a tattoo because I like the idea of a tattoo and I'll figure it out. The right thing will come to you and it will emerge, and you will know that that's the story that you need to tell, that it is important enough for you to put a big chunk of your life and your energy and tears and blood, and then do not let go until it's out in the world.
100%. You're not contradicting, girl. Like, I think it goes both ways, because to add to what you're saying, I had to find myself with 16 short films. Without the practice, you won't know your own voice. If it took me 16, that's my path. If it took somebody else only 2 or 1, that's great. But you have, I agree. You have to take your time, for sure.
Yeah.
But always with comfortable shoes.
Always. Always.
I mean, who's gonna contradict that one?
I would say two things, two very important things. Number one, watch a lot of cinema and make a lot of cinema. So what I mean is, the only way you will really be able to understand what your style is, you need to watch a lot of cinema, new cinema, old cinema, but also you need to make cinema. And like Gigi just said, we all have a camera right now. This is a camera, so you can. I remember when I started making my first films, I had this project with somebody else where I used to do the clip of the week, one short film every week, and we shot it every Wednesday. We do the editing, we release it online every Sunday, and we did 50 short films. They are terrible, of course, but that's the best way to grab your style, is to shoot a lot and watch a lot of films. That's the first thing. And the second thing I would say is, if you have this crazy idea and everybody keeps telling you to don't pursue it, that is something really hard, that you're going to lose all your life in it, that you won't be able to make it happen, that you should definitely go to look for something else. If everybody tells you that, usually it means you're on the right track. A director that I really admire told me this once, and it really worked for me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Isaac.
Yeah, I will finish just saying that don't be afraid of doing movies. Don't be afraid of take that step when it comes the time to take it. And even to take your camera and to try to do something and to upload it on the internet, you might get bashed by critics and by comments and whatever. But if you think and you're true to yourself, you will find out your way. And even if it's for horror, afraid is not a word that you have to be in consideration.
Yeah, you can't be afraid of failure.
Well, thank you very much, guys. It was a pleasure. It's also an honor to be with you. And thank you to everyone watching. This was the new wave of Latin America horror cinema in Comic-Con at Home 2020. And we hope to see you next year at Comic-Con 2021. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.